This is my retrospective for the Order 1886, which was developed by Ready at Dawn and published by Sony. And this is a PlayStation exclusive that came out a few years ago at the beginning of 2015, which I believe was also the same year that games like Bloodborne and The Witcher 3 and Batman Arkham Knight came out. So I recently replayed this game because I intended to do a retrospective on it, and I needed more screenshots to do this video. And I played through the entire game, and of course my opinion on this game hasn't changed. The Order 1886 is one of the biggest disappointments of the 8th console generation, and the game has some of the most wasted potential that I've seen, probably from any video game that I've ever played. The big problem with the Order 1886 is that it lacks insight when it comes to giving the player control. Ready at Dawn really failed to give any reason to keep the player invested. They did not take the player into account with most of the decisions that they made with this game. Because essentially what this game is an interactive movie, which has become more of a problem with video games, specifically with this console generation, because it wasn't an issue before in previous console generations. And this game is a prime example of why that's an issue. There are so many forced walking sections in this game that you wonder why they even bothered to make this a video game at all. And then the most interaction that you really have in terms of interacting with the level itself when you're not engaged in combat is by picking up some of these collectibles in the environment. And of course the collectibles aren't interesting. For one, some of them have text, but the text is way too small, so you can't really read what's written on the particular collectible item. And then others are just your typical audio diaries, which I don't like in any video game because it's a lazy form of storytelling. And speaking of the story in this game isn't good. And the reason it's not good is because, for one, it's cliche, it's by the numbers, and it's predictable. And the characters are also not very interesting in this game. This game takes place in the Industrial Revolution back in the late 1800s. And the game is essentially an alternate historical timeline where King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table have been engaged in this underground war, I guess, between the Knights of the Round Table and the Lycans, which are the werewolves in the game. And for centuries, the Knights have been on the losing end of that battle. And so in this game, you play as one of those knights throughout the entire game, a character named Grayson who takes up the mantle of Sir Galahad. And Galahad is not really an interesting character. He is solely meant to guide the player through the game's story, but you really don't learn anything about him as a character, and I didn't find his story to be interesting. And the same goes with the other characters that are in the game as well, from Lady Igraine to the rebel leader to Sir Percival, so on and so forth. None of them are interesting. So basically the story revolves around Sir Galahad discovering this conspiracy where there's traitors within the order working for the Lycans. And then they also throw vampires into the mix. So the game makes use of classic monsters and traditional folklore, and it blends that together with the Arthurian legend. And conceptually, it's a great idea. Like, if we're just talking about this game's concept, the Order 1886 has one of the strongest concepts that I've seen from any game this console generation, which is a big part of the reason why it's so disappointing. But it doesn't really do anything interesting with those concepts, because the story is not interesting, the characters aren't interesting. And that's not the only thing that's wrong with this game. The pacing of the game is just off, because in this game, it's divided into these chapters. There's 17 chapters in the game. I believe 17. And some of the chapters are just too short. The entire game only lasts a few hours, which I believe is around 6, maybe 7. And that's kind of stretching it. And in some of the game's chapters, there is absolutely no gameplay at all. A good example of that is chapter 7 in the game, where it's just a cutscene. No gameplay at all. And it's like, it's just incompetent. Why the hell would you design a game that's chapter based, that's linear, that's a third-person shooter, a cover shooter, and you have entire chapters in the game where there's absolutely no gameplay at all? Why would you do something like that? I just don't understand. And this development team really pissed me off because they decided to release a celebration photo upon the completion of this game's development before this game came out. And seeing as how the final product turned out, I don't know what the hell they were celebrating for. To me, I find that insulting because a lot of people bought this game for $60 and the game didn't have $60 worth of content. This game barely has $30 worth of content. And so, in regards to the combat system in the game, this is a third-person cover shooter, most similar to Gears of War, except it's more cinematic. The camera is closer up on you, and your movement is limited. And if I were to make a comparison between this and Gears of War has a camera that's not as close up on your ass. You can actually see your character from the waist up. And in Gears of War, you have a lot of mobility. You can roll. You can do the roadie run. You can evade forwards, backwards, sideways. You can vault over cover. You can vault around cover. And switching cover is quick. It's immediate and it's responsive. This game, not so much. And mechanically, the game is good when it comes to how it feels. Firing the weapons have kickback to them. They have power behind them when you fire them. And the cover system is functional. It does work. But the AI doesn't offer a lot of challenge in the game, which is a shame because the combat encounters in this game are limited. Too often the AI will not go into cover and they'll just run out of cover and just get shot because the AI is just not smart. And they didn't put in any difficulty levels in this game. So if you wanted more of a challenge, you can't. The game has one solitary difficulty setting. And that difficulty setting isn't challenging. And I remember before this game came out, someone from Ready at Dawn came out and said that this game was not going to have multiplayer. And I was thinking, this is great. Because multiplayer is a feature that's shoehorned into so many different video games now that don't need multiplayer at all. You know, and at that time I was thinking of games like the Tomb Raider 2013 reboot, which had a shoehorned multiplayer mode. That was the weakest element of that game game didn't need. And so I was thinking, okay, they're not going that direction with the Order 1886. I'm sure they're going to make a great single player game, right? Nope. This game is pretty much the only game that I can say needed a multiplayer mode. Because another big problem with the Order 1886 is that there's no replayability. Once you beat the game, there is zero reason to go back and play through it again. There's no separate difficulty levels, as I stated before. There's no multiplayer mode. There's no multiplayer of any kind in this game. And this game could have easily benefited from a multiplayer mode, which would have made up for its lackluster single-player component. They could have threw in some team deathmatch, some capture the flag or something, a King of the Hill based mode, something. Added in some multiplayer maps and just updated the game over time. And this could have easily turned out to be a much better game than it turned out to be. And they didn't even bother to add any DLC to this game. This is a bare bones game that was released for $60 that only lasted for a few hours with no multiplayer of any kind, no difficulty levels of any kind, no reason to go back through and play the game again, and all of their production value went into, of course, the graphics. And graphically, this is still one of the best video games I've ever played. It's one of the best looking games on the PlayStation 4. One of the best 8th console generation games graphically. Visually, the game has a lot of detail to it. It looks and feels like a movie, which would have been fine if it also felt like an interactive experience. And it really doesn't feel like an interactive experience. To have an interactive experience, the experience has to be active. You have to be active in that experience. The Order 1886 really isn't an active experience. It's a passive experience. You don't feel like you're playing something as much as you're experiencing something secondhand, and the game is just guiding you along. And then another cardinal sin that this game makes is all of the button prompts that are in the game, where the game will show you exactly what you need to press to interact with this. Press triangle to pick this up. Press square to interact with this. And then the QTEs. It's like, come the fuck on, dude. These game developers were really that stupid to put all these QTEs in the game. And it's not just one or two. No, it's like throughout the entire fucking game. you have these moments where the game will have these QTEs, and they're scripted, so you have to do them, of course, in order to get through the game. And they present no challenge, of course, because they're not naturally inserted into the gameplay the same way the older God of War games had them. And that just makes the game feel even more like a movie rather than a video game. And then the Lycan encounters in this game, the werewolves that you fight. Because the werewolves was one of the aspects that everyone was looking forward to in this game. Because if you look at the debut trailer for The Order 1886, this game has one of the best debut trailers for a video game to this day. And everyone was looking forward to the Lycans. And I was very much looking forward to what they were going to do with the werewolves. But the werewolves themselves are pretty much in-game QTEs. They have one attack, and that's a charge attack. And then they'll run, and whether they hit you or you evade that attack, which you do so through a QTE, of course, an in-game QTE, and you just roll out of the way, the werewolves will run behind some crates in the environment, and then they'll randomly pop their head out and charge at you again. And it's rinse and repeat until you either fuck up too many times and they kill you, or you kill them. It's pretty much impossible to die during one of the werewolf encounters. And there's not too many encounters with the werewolves in the game anyway. The Lycans don't have much of a presence in the game, which is another thing that was very disappointing about The Order 1886. And then you have the boss encounter at the end of the game, which is another in-game QTE sequence, where the game is telling you exactly how to play it. It gives you button prompts for everything that the boss does. There is practically zero control at all. And it goes back to that whole thing of this game being a passive experience. The Order 1886 can be summed up in one word: incompetence. Ready at Dawn went dark after this game was released. This game got mediocre reviews, which it deserved. A lot of 5 out of 10s across the board, because the game is mediocre as fuck. It's like they didn't even try and make a video game. What they tried to do was make a pretty tech demo for the PlayStation 4 and disguise it as a third-person cover shooter. And they succeeded in that regard. But the development team went dark after this game came out, and it's only until recently that Ready at Dawn announced that they were working on their next project. And they also announced that it's not a sequel to The Order 1886, which means they've abandoned the IP. Because they did such a bad job with this game that it would just be a complete mistake to try and develop a sequel for it at this point. Because it wouldn't sell. Because people hated the first game. And I remember when this game was coming out, someone on YouTube leaked the entire game. And there was a big controversy that the game was really only 5 hours long. And they were selling a $60 game that lasted only 5 hours. That didn't have any multiplayer of any kind or anything. No reason to go back through and play it again. And I originally had this game pre-ordered. Like, I was really looking forward to this game. A lot of people were talking shit about this game before it came out. But I was one of the few that really was looking forward to this. But after that YouTube leak, I canceled my pre-order and I switched it to Bloodborne. A game that I originally was not going to buy at full price. And as it turns out, I ended up really enjoying Bloodborne. A hell of a lot more than I enjoyed this game. I waited several months to get this game back in 2015, and I ended up getting it for Black Friday. And I'm glad that I did that, because this was not worth $60 full price. This was not worth $30 half price. This is a bargain bin game, which, while it may have high production values, it's not worth the asking price of most other video games. It's not worth the asking price of many other video games that are on the market. Not even close. The Order 1886 was a colossal failure and a prime example as to what's wrong with modern gaming. When I play a video game, I want to play a video game. I don't want to play an interactive movie. I had this issue with Red Dead Redemption 2 throughout the course of that game. I had this issue with the newest God of War. I had this issue with The Witcher 3. When I play a video game, I want to play a video game. I don't want to play an interactive movie that's disguised as a video game. The only video game that I've played that perfectly blends cinematic storytelling and the active, interactive experience of playing a video game together in one is The Last of Us. That's the only video game that's got it right, that's done it properly. And so many game developers have tried to emulate what Naughty Dog accomplished with that game, and they have all failed. The Order 1886 remains to this day one of my most hated video games of the 8th console generation. And I'm glad that Ready at Dawn has decided to move on from this IP. And it's a shame that this game had so much potential and it was just thrown away because the game developers were once again incompetent.